What we're looking at now is something called the database management system. And the database management system is often referred to as the Dbms. And what one of the functions of the database management system is to separate out all of the data and the churning of the data and how we use that data from the actual application which presents it. And so let's have a look at what exactly I mean by that. So if we go back to our table on films here, so this is all the data that we've got, and it's all nicely structured and organized, and this would be sitting inside the Dbms. So the Dbms would hold this films table with all of the data. However, we don't want the database itself to be storing how we present that data. And the reason for that is we may want to change how we present it. There's other reasons as well. If we look at this, which would be one possible view, so on a website we're going to use this data which we've got inside the Dbms, then one of the things we don't want to be doing is storing things like the image for this certificate. And one of the things we also don't want to be doing is storing a load of stars inside our database. So if you remember, what we actually had in our Dbms was we stored that there would be a rating of 10. However, we don't need to store every single star. We can just translate that outside of the Dbms. We can translate that in our application to mean put 10 stars onto the screen. Equally, we can just store in the database management system the data of a certificate of 15. And then in the application, we can say if it's a 15, put that image on. We don't need to store the image every time. And then we could create hundreds of different applications which would present that data differently every time. So we might make a book of films, and that would just be presenting the same data in a different format. And so we try and separate wherever possible the presentation from the data itself, and the data gets stored in the database management system in the database. So the question is, what exactly does the Dbms do? And it doesn't actually do all that much. Well, it does an incredible amount underneath, but in terms of what we need to understand of what it does, it's not actually that significant. So the Dbms, what are its features? And the features which we have for the Dbms are, one of them is that it will store our data efficiently. And by that we mean compactly. So if you were writing your own programming having to store the data, you would have to worry about exactly how you're going to store that, how much space you would give for each of the fields, each of the records. You don't need to worry about that. The Dbms does all of that work for you. If you tell it a data type, it knows how to store that efficiently, and someone's put a lot of effort into doing that. It can also access the data quickly. So if you write an application, you've got to consider, how do I go through and search 1 million or 100 million records? The Dbms does all that work for you. You just tell it, go and find me this record, go and find me all these records that conform to some query, and it's the Dbms that's been optimized to do that quickly for you. The next major, and this is one of the key features of the database management system, is to serve you queries. So you can give queries, and it has the ability to give you the answers to those queries. So by a query, if I had my table here sitting in my Dbms, I might query, I want all of the films in alphabetical order, and the Dbms will serve that to me. Or I want all the films released after the year 2000, and the Dbms will return the result of that query. So that's a real key point of what the Dbms does. It also allows multiple concurrent, and that means at the same time, so multiple users or applications can use that database or the Dbms at the same time. So you're not restricted like maybe a word processed document where one person opens it and then everyone else is locked out from it. With a database, you can have lots of people accessing it, reading information at the same time. So it's very useful for management of club information with the number of people and all their personal information, or a school database or a university database. All of those types of things need many people looking at the same data, and they all can do that with a DBMS. One of the other things which a database management system will do with respect to users is it will manage the security of the users. So it will say which rights certain users have and which bits of information they can look at, and whether they're allowed to just read it or whether they can write to it. Another thing which the DBMS gives you the option is for doing backups and replication. So what you don't want is that if there's a fire at a site, then the whole of the database disappears. So the DBMS will solve that problem and work out how to have maybe 2 copies somewhere else remotely, and it will also keep the regular backups for you if you set it up that way. And a couple of other things which the DBMS can do as features: it can also calculate and perform calculations for you. So for example, the sort of thing which that might be is if you had a database for a social network, then you might want to know quickly what the number of users are. And so the DBMS, you can give it a short query and the DBMS will be able to do that calculation. It might be that if you had all of your company earnings for every month in a database, it would be able to calculate for you the sum or the total earnings. And one of the other areas which it can do is it can enforce rules. And so if you tell it that I want the year to be a number or an integer, then it can make sure that only those numbers, only a number is typed in, not letters. If you tell it that you're going to have text of a certain length, it can enforce that rule that it's got to be a certain length. If you say that a certain field has to be filled in, it can make sure that field is filled in before it will enter a record in. And so all of these things, calculations, enforcing of rules, along with storing the data efficiently, accessing the data quickly, the massive ability to do queries, having concurrent users, so lots of users at the same time, keeping the security of the database and the security of the users, along with backups and replication. And this is everything which the database management system is responsible for.